Before we begin, I have one quick request. Please take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Now let's dive into today's incredible story. SRE can't even look after herself, Gerald Voss announced, his tone carrying through the courtroom as though he'd practiced it in front of a mirror for weeks. I sat at the defendant's table with my fingers laced together in my lap, digging my thumbnail into my palm hard enough to leave a mark. I refused to look at him. I refused to shake my head. I refused to let a single tear fall. Because Gerald had already primed everyone to believe that tears meant I was unstable. His lawyer stood at his side, one hand resting on a bulging folder. Your Honor, Mr. Voss is only seeking temporary guardianship because Emma's condition has grown dangerous. Dangerous. The word rippled through two spectators in the back row, prompting whispers. Gerald dipped his chin low, as if the admission physically pained him. After her mother passed, she simply stopped coping. She skips meals. She's terrified of strangers. She can't handle finances. She needs someone dependable. My lawyer, Priya, nudged a slender folder toward me beneath the table. The judge set down his pen. Then he glanced up and asked, "Did you truly believe no one would check this?" Gerald's attorney went white. And for the first time all morning, Gerald's performance cracked. The room fell into a silence so complete, I could hear the court clerk's keys, clicking. Gerald blinked, startled. "Excuse me?" The judge didn't rush to answer. He looked down at the paperwork Gerald had submitted, then over at the lawyer beside him, then back at Gerald. No longer seeing a concerned stepfather, but a man who'd badly overplayed his hand. Up until that instant, every eye in the room had treated me like the problem. 24 years old, newly bereaved, diagnosed with panic disorder following a car crash, and quiet enough that people confused my silence with fragility. Gerald had been counting on exactly that. He shouted behind closed doors and turned gentle the moment anyone else was watching. My grief to him was confusion. My fear was his proof. And now, standing before a judge, he was petitioning to seize control of my medical decisions, my house, and the inheritance my mother had left behind. Priya tapped the folder twice with her fingers, our agreed signal to stay calm. Across the aisle, Gerald's attorney glanced at his phone again, his hand trembling this time. The judge lifted a printed page from his desk. "Mr. Voss," he said, "let's discuss the psychological evaluation you filed." 3 weeks before that hearing, I'd walked in on Gerald wrapping my mother's silverware in packing paper. He'd scrawled estate inventory across a box in bold marker, as if the kitchen no longer belonged to me. "What are you doing?" I asked. He didn't turn. "Securing valuables. That's Mom's wedding silver. And it's now part of an estate you're not emotionally fit to oversee." I stood frozen in the doorway as he wrapped another piece. The house still carried the scent of my mother's lavender soap. Her favorite mug still sat by the sink, yet Gerald moved through her kitchen as though sorrow had granted him a license to catalog everything she'd owned. "The house belongs to me," I said. He finally turned, his face composed but his eyes flint hard. "Emma, grief has a way of rewriting memory to suit what someone needs to believe." Before I could respond, he scooped up a stack of envelopes from the counter. One had already been slit open. "That's my mail." "It's probate paperwork," he said flatly. "Stressful material. I'm filtering it so you don't unravel." I stepped closer. "You don't get to filter my life." His smile vanished. For one heartbeat, the mask everyone else saw fell away completely. His voice dropped low. "Remember the funeral? You were shaking so hard your aunt had to walk you outside. The whole town saw it. That wasn't grief. That was evidence." The word hit like ice water. That same afternoon, I tried to log into my bank account and discovered my password had been changed without my knowledge. When I dialed the estate lawyer my mother had trusted for years, the line was dead. Within minutes, Gerald materialized in the hallway. "Who are you calling?" I tightened my grip on the phone. "How do you even know that?" "Because unstable people make reckless choices." The following morning, I found myself in a legal aid office tucked behind the county courthouse, sitting across from Priya Nair. My mother's hospice nurse had quietly passed me her number after Gerald told visitors I required constant supervision. Priya listened without a single interruption before opening her laptop. Emergency guardianships move fast, she warned, especially once the petitioner attaches medical documentation. My therapist would never call me incompetent. Priya's expression shifted. She turned her screen toward me. Then who wrote this? I arrived at the architecture firm at 8:12 that morning, coffee in one hand, Priya's business card in the other. Before I reached my desk, Marcus stepped out of the conference room. Emma, he said carefully, can we talk for a moment? HR was already seated inside. The blinds hung half open, and I caught two coworkers slowing near the glass, feigning interest in the project board. Marcus avoided my eyes. The HR director folded her hands on the table. We received a call this morning from your stepfather. My stomach dropped. Gerald called here? He mentioned an active court case regarding your decision-making capacity, she said, and forwarded some documents. Marcus slid a printed page across to me. Gerald's emergency petition. My name sitting at the top like a warning sign. He told you I shouldn't be trusted with client budgets, I said. Marcus exhaled slowly. He claimed you lost a client's deposit. That never happened. I opened my laptop right there at the table, pulled up the account ledger with shaking hands. Every transaction reconciled. Every invoice approved. No missing funds, no overdue reports. Marcus leaned in to read the screen, and HR's face changed. He also said you'd fallen behind on rent, she added. I own my mother's house, I told her. There is no rent. For the first time, Marcus looked ashamed rather than wary. He knew private medical details, he murmured. He sounded completely credible. That was the moment I understood the full scope of what Gerald was doing. He wasn't just trying to sway a judge. He was making certain that everyone around me would hesitate before ever taking my word over his. By midday, Priya had filed a formal objection and demanded verification of every document Gerald had submitted. She called to update me. I'm subpoenaing your therapist and your bank records. But Emma, the hearing is tomorrow. If he wins temporary authority first, he can freeze your accounts and force you out of that house before we ever get a chance to fight back. When I got home, Gerald was standing in the driveway with our neighbors, Mrs. Alvarez and Mr. Doyle. He turned as if he'd been waiting for me. She's struggling to accept help, he told them gently. I marched up the driveway. Give me the estate folder. His eyebrows lifted. This is precisely the paranoia I warned the court about. Mrs. Alvarez took a small step back as though she believed him. Before I could argue, a car pulled up to the curb. A process server stepped out, confirmed my name, and handed me the notice for tomorrow's hearing. Gerald waited until the neighbors looked away before leaning in close enough that only I could hear him. By this time tomorrow, every signature you need will run through me. My debit card was declined at 7:18 the next morning. I stood frozen on the porch, watching the rideshare app flash, "Payment failed," in bold red. That's not possible, I whispered, opening my banking app to find a banner reading, "Account under protective review," stretched across the top. Gerald's car was already gone from the driveway. He'd left early for court, and somehow he'd begun acting as though the judge had already handed him my entire life. My phone buzzed. It was Priya. Don't call the bank from the house, she said before I could get a word out, and don't confront him. He froze your card. I've sent a driver. Get in and come straight here. At the courthouse, Gerald stood outside the hearing room with his attorney, looking rested and composed, while I looked like someone who had spent the morning proving her competence while being deliberately stripped of it. His attorney approached Priya with a folder in hand. We can skip testimony altogether, he offered. 6 months of temporary guardianship. Mr. Voss oversees housing, medical care, and estate distributions. No public hearing required. Gerald offered me a soft, pitying smile. Priya didn't so much as glance at the folder. You mean she surrenders her objections before anyone reviews your evidence? The attorney's jaw tensed. Then Priya's phone buzzed. She stepped aside, read the message, and her eyes sharpened instantly. "What is it?" I asked. "Partial bank statements," she said. "Estate withdrawals labeled as home repairs, several payments routed to a private clinic." "I've never set foot in a private clinic." "I know." She scrolled further, then stopped cold. "And this therapist letter, it uses your married name." "I've never been married." Priya turned toward the clerk's desk and handed over a note listing a medical license number pulled straight from Gerald's evaluation. The clerk disappeared through a side door with the file. Gerald's attorney watched it happen and leaned in to whisper something urgent to his client. The hearing proceeded regardless. Gerald testified first, composed and mournful. "Emma isn't safe on her own," he said. "She needs to be protected from her own choices." Then the clerk returned carrying a printed verification report, and the judge's expression changed the moment he began reading it. Before Priya could rise for cross-examination, the judge raised a single hand. "Counsel, stop! We need to address this immediately." Gerald's attorney froze mid-motion, pen still on his legal pad. Gerald glanced between his lawyer and the bench. "Your Honor?" The judge lifted the verification report. "Mr. Voss, the court reached out to the therapist named in your filing." Gerald's face twitched. Beside me, Priya sat perfectly still. "She confirmed treating Ms. Hart for panic attacks following a car accident," the judge continued. "She did not diagnose incapacity. She did not recommend guardianship. And she did not sign the statement attached to this petition." A murmur rippled through the courtroom, quiet but unmistakable. I looked at Gerald for the first time that morning and truly saw him. His mouth opened, but no words came. The judge pressed on. "The license number listed on this evaluation belongs to a retired psychiatrist, practicing in another county entirely. The clinic's address is real, but the department named in this report does not exist." Priya rose to her feet. "Your Honor, we also have bank records showing estate withdrawals disguised as home repairs, routed directly to that same clinic account. My client has never received any treatment there." Gerald snapped. "That's not—" "Do not interrupt," the judge warned. Gerald fell silent. Priya laid another document on the table. "Mr. Voss altered Miss Hart's banking access, intercepted her probate mail, contacted her employer with fabricated claims, and used those claims to manufacture a paper trail of incompetence ahead of this hearing." The judge turned to Gerald. "Is there anything you'd like to say before I rule on this petition?" Gerald looked toward his attorney, who offered nothing in return. I finally spoke, my voice softer than I expected. "You used my mother's funeral against me." Gerald met my eyes then. Not as a worried stepfather, not as a protector, but as a man who had finally been exposed. "You panicked in front of everyone," he said weakly. "Because she was dead," I answered. Nobody in the room moved. Priya's voice stayed level. "The trust required a full accounting within 30 days of Mrs. Hart's death. Mr. Voss needed guardianship to delay that accounting, silence Emma's objections, and justify the missing funds himself." The judge denied the emergency guardianship on the record. He struck every medical document Gerald had submitted, referred the forged evaluation for criminal investigation, and stripped Gerald of all estate authority before the courtroom emptied. Gerald's lawyer requested a recess. The judge told him, "Your client may want separate representation." That was when Gerald finally sank into his chair, not with composure, not with pride, but as though his legs had simply given out beneath him. Outside the courtroom, Marcus called Priya to confirm my job was secure and that HR would formally document Gerald's interference. By week's end, 2 officials arrived at the house to collect the estate files Gerald had locked away in the study. Mrs. Alvarez watched from her porch but didn't wave. Gerald's attorney withdrew from the case once the forgery referral became part of the public record. The estate accounts were frozen, audited, and corrected wherever possible, with several transfers reversed entirely. Gerald was barred from the property and prohibited from contacting me about the estate ever again. 3 days later, he sent a single message. "I only panicked about the money." Priya archived it for the investigator. Then I deleted his number for good. The house didn't feel peaceful right away. Some rooms still sat half-packed. Certain drawers remained empty where my mother's belongings had once been. My panic attacks didn't disappear simply because a judge had believed me, but they were mine again. No longer evidence, no longer leverage, no longer a story Gerald could sell to anyone willing to listen. Months later, I sat at my mother's kitchen table with the final estate folder spread open before me, the independent administrator's signature inked on the last page. The house was mine. The trust was mine to manage, my doctors, my schedule, my decisions, my name, all mine again. I lifted my mother's keys from the table and slid them onto my own keyring. Then I walked to the front door, turned the lock from the inside, and let the quiet settle around me. For the first time since my mother had died, my life required no one else's permission.